Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at transportation of data. We'll be discussing the role of the transportation layer, transport layer responsibilities, transport layer protocols, transmission control protocol, TCP. We'll look at user datagram protocol, UDP, and then finally we'll have a discussion about the right transport layer protocol for the right application. This episode is part of my series on Introduction to Networks for the CCNA. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. We are looking at the transport layer of the OSI model and the TCP model. Here's a picture of them. Once again, we have our OSI model and our TCP models here. The transport layer is the same between them. It is the same between them. And so what we talk about here applies to both the OSI model and the TCP model. The transport layer, it's responsible for the logical communication between applications that are running on different hosts. This, for example, this would be like when a voice over IP phone calls another voice over IP phone. How does that communication happen between the hosts? That's what we're looking at here. And the second thing the transport layer does, it's responsible for the communication with the lower protocols, the protocols that are actually responsible for moving that data. The transport layer has several responsibilities. One of them is keeping track of multiple conversations. This would be in your web browser. If you open up multiple tabs, how does that tab know to display the right data in the right tab? Or even if you have like multiple web browsers, you have Chrome, you have Firefox open, how does the web browser know which traffic is for that one and which traffic is for the other web browser? It is also responsible for segmenting and then reassembling that data. We're taking that big message and making it into smaller pieces as it goes down the OSI model. Then when it's received, it's responsible for reassembling that data. The transport layer also adds its own header information that helps identify what type of traffic it is, the order that it needs to be reassembled. And through the whole process, the transport layer uses segmentation and multiplexing to make these multiple conversations happen all at the same time. The transport layer, it helps facilitate the conversation. The transport layer is layer 4 in the OSI model, and layer 3 below it, the network layer, that's where our IP addresses are. IP does not specify how to deliver or transport the data. All it talks about is getting the data from one point to its final destination. The transport layer, that specifies how to transfer the messages between the hosts. And then the transport layer is also responsible for managing the reliability of that message. The transport layer, it does contain two different protocols here, the TCP and the UDP. One is reliable, which is the TCP. One is not reliable, that is the UDP. TCP basic operations. First thing it does is it numbers and tracks the data segments transmitted from a host to a specific destination. Then once that data reaches its destination, it is responsible for acknowledging that data has been received. If that acknowledgement doesn't come back through, TCP is responsible for retransmitting that data. Then, when that data arrives at its destination, it's responsible for putting that data back in the right order. Because sometimes that data arrives in the wrong order because of retransmissions, taking different paths through the internet. It's responsible for putting that data together in the right order. And one of the last things TCP does, it's responsible for sending data at a rate at which the receiver can accept that data. And so part of the TCP protocol is to find out what rate the receiver can receive data at and not to send it faster than that. User Datagram protocols, or UDP, it's responsible for sending and delivering data with very little overhead. UDP is a connectionless protocol. It doesn't have to establish a connection and keep that connection open to send data. UDP is known as a best effort protocol. And what that means is when we send data, there is no acknowledgement that comes back. Basically, we're going to send that data and then we forget about it. We don't worry about if that data has arrived or not. When we look at choosing the right transport layer protocol here, we have the choice, like we said, between UDP and TCP. UDP is what we look for as a request and reply applications, where data is minimal and we don't have to have that retransmission, either because that retransmission isn't needed or the time in which that retransmission would happen, the time has passed. And a lot of times what we say is UDP is used for real-time communications. This is voice over IP, some of your streaming medias. If we had to retransmit part of a voice over IP conversation, well, think about that. You'd retransmit a second ago's words in that conversation, and that would come out of the phone in the wrong order. And what would happen to that data that you're supposed to save, because now we have retransmitted data? It just gets very confusing. And so with this real-time data, if part of that conversation is missed, it's passed. That conversation is passed. Hopefully you are able to make up in your head what was the missing part, and we're carrying on. We don't retransmit that data. Where if we have to make sure all that data gets there, like a web page or a piece of email, we will retransmit that data. That's where we use TCP. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on transportation of data. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com. There you can find out how to get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on Introduction to Networks for the CCNA. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on Introduction to Networks for the CCNA. I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.